Taking the Troika Batman out of the equation, I did take rather hard account on the fact that the other two figures out of this wave are more or less repaints of pre-existing figures I've already covered on the channel, and considering that that is the case, I decided to simply just take the two and make a comparison video between the different alterations, color swaps, and see exactly what the key differences are, if any. And the first one I chose to cover is going to be the one with probably the most marginal differences as far as sculpt differences or alterations or objections as far as what they kind of decided to cut out or add in, etc. Because this is probably the most one-to-one repaint amongst the two, which only, I guess, sort of makes sense from a manufacturer standpoint, since this is technically a Azrael Batman that McFarlane is sort of backtracking a little bit as far as the chronological order of the Nightfall storyline. Because this guy originally came out with a pre-existing wave of the first appearance Batman and the Nightfall Black and Gray variant that was part of that bundle package. But it's a little strange considering that this is the super red and gray variant that appears in Night's End after Batman has already recovered and says, you know what, I'm ready to get back to work, get the hell out of here, as far as what Azrael has been up to in his shenanigans. Whereas this guy is technically the Night Quest variant that has now most recently been released, and this is technically the sandwich in between Nightfall and Night's End sort of stamps in the storyline. So we're kind of backtracking a little bit and making do on what was originally omitted. It would only stand that he would simply just take this pre-existing buck and simply give him a brand new coat of paint. And that is precisely what went down. And that's probably the biggest thing that I could deduce when these original promo photos and this initial reveal was first unveiled on the social media platforms, is immediately going back to the original Night Quest, or I'm sorry, the Night's End version, and simply just redecorating some of the color palettes and swapping certain things out. And I can easily deduce that from the sculpting of the helmet to the pre-existing body, taking original parts as far as the leggings and most definitely the torso piece from the Nightfall Azrael Batman that was initially a Walmart exclusive with that like baby blue kind of aesthetic, as well as like the cape, and then of course that very iconic mask without the mouth plate being exposed. It's almost becoming a pick of the litter as far as which version of Azrael you truly do want, because I think at this point we got like what, 3 or 4 practically out there. And so when it came to these two, I knew that sculpting wise it was practically gonna be identical. I scanned them up and down, and from what I can tell, yes, that helmet is sculpted exactly the same, almost no key differences as far as the molding of the plastic. The rubberized shoulder guards are then attached to the chest plate and the symbol there at the front. The way that the abdominal armor, as well as the pockets around the belt, as well as whatever you want to call it, this kind of like ammo strap he's got going on the left thigh. And speaking of the legs, of course, you have the spikes kind of coming out of the caps right there. Very emblematic of the Nightfall kind of overall aesthetic to Azrael Batman, and even the gauntlets and the spikes. Almost everything from a fundamental standpoint for the sculpture is practically identical. And as such, you're also going to have the articulation that is practically one-to-one. I didn't really find anything that was notably different. And as such, most of the articulation is pretty good. I like how flush the legs truly do feel in terms of placement, in terms of balancing, which is very key and important as far as balancing the figure and making sure that it's not overly top heavy, considering that much like the original Night's End version over here, you got these spiky sort of cape pieces. I don't really want to call it a cape, but rather these like wingtips that are separated from out of the box and require the exact same identical form of assembly by fitting in the pegs on the shoulder guard pieces, fitting very flush and very snug into the holes themselves, and then the actual linings that are sculpted into the plastic are again one-to-one identical. The only key difference here is that now they're going to be black as opposed to this kind of bloody sort of candy apple red, although I guess you could argue that this is more of a toned down muted sort of red, sort of leaning towards in that maroon direction, whereas the red that's utilized over here in the brand new Night Quest version is going to be more so of that hot rod, very cherry red that it really pops. But before I get to those very stark color swap differences that is arguably the key difference between these two guys, there is, however, one very huge omittance on this figure that is sculpt related that you may or may not have been able to deduce right now, which would have to be these kind of cartridge straps that are attached to his gauntlets and then kind of circumvent being attached to the back of his backpack circular piece that he's got going on towards the back over here. and those are very blatantly gone. You'll notice that you have some very clear spaces on the gauntlets where those things would normally attach and are this time hollowed out. Gotta be honest, I guess maybe there's like a narrative sort of explanation as to why he decided to cut those out, but at the same time, keep in mind that we're dealing with unconventional release points where technically in the story, this guy comes in later, so he's probably had to like strap those things on that have some of his ammo, considering that this is a much more violent take on Batman, considering that it's not Bruce Wayne underneath. So here he was probably trying to do things by the book as much as possible, and that's pretty much your explanation. So that's just something, just sort of a corner that you get kind of painted on as far as releasing figures of this guy, but not following the narrative cohesion, not following the structure that the story's then told in. But mark my words, everything else is practically the same as far as sculpting, as far as decals or the things that are kind of grafted. Like I mentioned before, articulation is the same. Even some of the shoulder joints have, like I said, this playfulness to them where I really like the fluctuation of the butterfly, the bending of the elbows, but at the same time, sometimes the sculpting of the gauntlets are a little bit too oversized to the point where bending at the elbows are not fully realized as I would have liked it to be, but that's neither here or there. I've already covered that before in a previous video. You guys can go and check that out. For now, just know that the main difference as to why you will probably feel any kind of movement in yourself as a collector to want to pick this guy up is whether or not you vibe with this color aesthetic, this specific palette, versus the Night Scent version. And here's where things get a little muddy for me personally, because if there's one sort of quote-unquote objective thing that I can pick apart here as far as what this guy does better than this guy previously, would have to be that maybe it's able to sort of play on color signs just a bit more effectively than this guy, in terms of being able to take the three predominant colors it's utilizing, which in this case would have to be the very light gray, some accents of black and white, but the three predominant colors would have to be this gray that's making up the bottom half of the figure, of course the red that's circumventing the shoulder guards, the gauntlets, the cape or the spikes, whatever you want to call them, and then most definitely the collar, as the very Azrael focused collar that he's got right underneath the helmet, and the helmet in and of itself. So it's able to take those three colors and sort of put them in a pattern that feels very varied. And I think to me, the biggest example to really illustrate this would have to be the gauntlets, where you'll notice you have chrome for the gloves, but then you have the red for the gauntlets, but predominantly the outer shell. And right underneath, you'll notice that you have more of that chromy gold paint applications. It's sort of indented there on the inside to kind of make it seem like he's got two layers, even though it's simply just one layer of plastic, but causing the illusion that you got two separations going on right there that looks very pleasing, that, like I said, kind of fits color theory a little bit better than the most recent release, because then you kind of shift your focus on over here, and then you'll notice that the gauntlet is all just one fell swoop of that chromy gold paint application. There's no changes, there's no variances. The color for that gold color is utilized for the outer shell of the gauntlet, the inner part, as well as the glove in and of itself. So that's probably the only thing that I would say this guy was able to be a bit more exceptional on, is being able to play with the colors and vary them in a way that feels a bit more pleasing to the eye and feels a bit more refined than this thing that feels just a little bit more slapdash, because, like I said, not much is being changed on over here. With that said, I cannot argue that the black with this, like I mentioned before, cherry red and the gold sandwich right in the middle really does pop on the shelf just a little bit more vibrant than this guy over here, especially since the red hue that this guy, the Night Scent version, is using is just a little bit more toned down, but at least it's favoring and sort of matching, clashing much more well with the gray and the white and even accents of the black, and even a little bit of the mustard yellow utilized for some of the pockets and the strap there on the thigh. So this guy is just able to take vibrancy in a way that if someone were to say that they probably prefer this guy, I wouldn't necessarily argue them. Right now, I gotta be honest, I've already played with these guys for a couple of days now and kind of scanned them and analyzed them to see which one I truly do prefer. And to be quite honest, I still don't really have an answer for you guys. I hate this. I really do hate this. My OCD brain is going crazy right now, because I would probably argue that because red is my favorite color, I want to lean towards this guy, and I do appreciate the strapped on cartridges. Well, pause, phrasing there, but the cartridges that he has kind of hooked up to his gauntlets towards the back right there, that, like I said, kind of add this level of value, this kind of set dressing that really gives the figure a bit more presence. But at the same time, this guy, like I said, he just really does pop, that I would be proud to put him up on the shelf, probably like back to back with this guy, to kind of give like these two shades of the same character, the personality shift. So I really don't know what to tell you guys at this current juncture. Maybe I'll update you guys in the future, but for now, I really don't know what else to say. It really just boils down to key preference as to which one you guys would really prefer. However, spoiler alert, that's not a problem I'm going to have when it comes to the Batwing variances, because here I can clearly tell you exactly which one I'm going to be favoring. This one, I didn't necessarily have any problems, difficulties trying to iron out a personal favorite. And of course, I'm referring to Batwing, which is going to be the Batman of Africa, only he was originally played by David Zavimvi, I think is the name. I might be butchering it, but he was pretty much the Congolese version of Batman in the original Batman Inc. storyline, which is over here. Now, the New 52 interpretation is played by Luke Fox, Lucius' son. And so you can see right here the very stark difference as far as the approach to the suit, which is arguably utilizing the exact same buck. Very, very similar to the case that was happening with Azrael Batman. It's pretty much taking the exact same buck as far as sculpting, as far as design, as far as articulation, which is completely identical, so I don't really have to go across the different points. And they feel just as good as before. In fact, I have remarked about in that original review where I was really digging that articulation. In fact, it was utilizing some points that I haven't really seen before, specifically with the ankles and even some of the feelings and the tooling towards the torso and the head joint that I really did favor. And it's really good to see that they pretty much carried on over those same joints on over to the version 2.0. But then you'll notice that the key difference would have to be going from a predominantly bluish tinted silver color over here to then completely decked out in black here. Of course, it's going to be the one that I'm going to be favoring the most, because whenever it comes to, say, the PlayStation 5, which one am I going to go towards? The white colored PlayStation 5, which doesn't necessarily look all too bad, or the black shells that I can then swap the white ones for and have a console that is slick looking and goes with the rest of my consoles, with the rest of my other entertainment pieces as far as fitting very naturally into the decor of the room. Yeah, I'm going to go with black. Black goes well with everything. It's probably one of the best form-fitting colors, and we are still talking about a Batman character, a Batman mantle. Why wouldn't you want it to be black? And you can maybe make the argument that he's going for like a matted, somewhat semi-matted aesthetic to the jet black version of black that he's going for, but it's predominantly black, you'll notice right here. And not only is it utilizing a color scheming that I probably favor more so than a lightish gray that we got going on over here with the silver, but then on top of that, I don't know if this is like a toy manufacturing sort of situation. I don't know exactly what the science behind it is, but I noticed that in doing so, they also got rid of this weird washing effect that's going on with the silver here. It's something that I've seen plague other action figures outside of just McFarlane. I've seen this happen with Mattel. I've seen it happen with Marvel Legends, with Hasbro. Hasbro overall, not just with their Marvel stuff, but even with some of the Star Wars stuff, some pre-existing figures from back in the day, back when they took over for Marvel Legends with, like, say, the Spider-Man 3 stuff, where you sometimes are dealing with this specific tint of color, and it's doing something with the plastic to where you can see very easy warpings of the sculpt. You can kind of see these kind of like amoebas looking designs to the aesthetic that I've never found all too pleasing to the eye. I never really liked looking at certain things happening like that. And I noticed that it's a big manufacturing problem that other toy companies have had to deal with, and it looks like McFarlane had to bite that bullet when it came to this Batwing. Definitely not the case going to be happening over here because it's predominantly a black plastic, because I feel like that had to do with something encoded into the molding of the plastic here, because the plastic is that silver blue, but it's just doing something with that, like I said, that morphing effect that's happening within the paint that it just looks kind of off to me. Again, I'm not a toy manufacturer, but it just doesn't look all that great to me. Whereas over here, it's completely absent because you're dealing with a solid black color for the plastic, and therefore Not only does it look nice, but overall it's matching that of the Batwings, it's matching that of the jetpack, which I think is going for a much glossier design than the original. I will admit that you have a much more matted finish to the jetpack going on with the original Batwing as opposed to the 2.0, but this time you have a much more sense of uniformity to the suit than before. And unlike those Azrael Batmans that I just covered, we don't really just stop at the paint discrepancies between the two. We also have some major sculpting overhauls that were done for the 2.0 here. The most notable one is obviously going to be the head sculpt. You'll notice that this time they're going for a completely helmeted look for the cowl as opposed to the very exposed top of the head and the mouth plate there, where he simply just has some pretty glorified goggles that connect to the bottom of the neck, and you have a little bit exposed of the head sculpt there, which is painted pretty decently, but I've never been the biggest fan of this design. So staying truthful to the comic book interpretation, you of course have the head completely covered up over here. Because it looks badass, I of course am gonna favor this one over this one. I've never been, like I said, a huge fan of how the goggles connect with the thing. Very I don't know. I just never really liked that aesthetical choice. Whereas over here, it just looks much more badass. The visor, how it kind of leans into the ears like that, and you even have a little hint of blue to kind of make out a little bit of the side stare of the widened eye lens, and to me it just looks aesthetically pleasing. And as you navigate down towards the bottom, you'll notice the other major sculpting change, which has to be the chest piece right there. It's probably the only thing that they definitely changed as far as the sculpt, because everything else, as far as the ridges of the suit, the gears, the panels, the things, even a little bit of the abdominal pieces right there, where you kind of make out certain little fabric changes as far as making it look like it's armor, but also Kevlar mixed in with a few armorized chest plates and abdominal plates that cover up parts of the body and parts of the muscle. It looks pretty much one-to-one identical with that of the original Batwing, except when we get to the chest, and you'll notice that the overhauled look of the bat symbol, as well as simply just going for a much more sleeker and kind of toned down and simplified look to the chest plate that simply just has the white symbol there, with a few lines of the wings kind of threading and quote-unquote bleeding on towards the bottom here. Apart from that, though, didn't really notice anything terribly different as far as the sculpt change, as far as the buck of the figure, as far as the tooling. Still feels great in hand, but here we simply just have more points accumulated for the overall figure here versus that of the original. But there's one point that this new version 2.0 was not able to beat out the original on, which would have to be accessories. This is a very iffy area where I do think that McFarlane, again, is doing some questionable things, because it still doesn't really, I don't know if it's like an inflation thing, I don't know if it's a licensing thing, a patent thing, I don't know. I don't know, it's quite clearly a mystery to me. And that's because this brand new version 2.0 comes with simply just one accessory, which would have to be this blue fire piece that you can then attach to his jetpack on the back right here to give him kind of like a fiery effect to make it look like he's flying about. And frankly, that is it. He comes with your standard black base. Again, if you're dealing with a figure that is more or less aesthetically designed to look like he's flying, especially when you add in a fire effect to be attached to the backpack, I would say you're probably more so inclined to want to include a flight base as opposed to just a general black base. But of course, I digress that point, considering that that ended up not happening. But it gets even worse, because despite the original also only having a black base and not a flight stand, the original not only had the blue effect that is a little bit lighter in shade to kind of match a little bit of the color variance with the lighter tone of blue tinted gray for the overall suit that can fit into that jetpack, but it's funny, I almost missed this, and I had to kind of give a double take to original packaging and pull it out because I was like, oh shit, I almost missed it. He came with fire effects that could be attached to both of his feet, so if you do happen to have a flight stand hanging about, you can then utilize it to make it look like he's mid-flight. And so you have these orangey, fiery effects that are decently sculpted and even a little bit on the pointy side, but have the pegs to fit into either of his feet, so that then you can complete that overall effect and make him look a little bit more badass. And don't get me wrong, you could still utilize these on the brand new, because he technically has the two holes on either of his feet for either the base stand, the black base, or of course these things that are still swappable. But simply just the fact that this guy didn't come with them, I'm like, all right, what would have cost to simply just regurgitate these exact little flame pieces on over here? Why are we taking away? I know it's a very exponentially small sort of thing to include, but it's simply just the language that it's translating. The fact that you looked at these effects and just went, we're not going to include those. I'm like, but why? I mean, how much would it really cost? It's like whenever you have a company like goddamn Apple saying, oh, we're not going to include the charger, and you know for a fact that that charger only costs them like a few dollars. We're talking about Apple here. We're not talking about some startup. So what would have really have been the case? How much would it could have hurt to have included these guys in? Especially when you take into consideration that you are now increasing the price on even the standard DC Multiverse fare, and we're starting to either get rid of fiery effects for accessories or simple little applications that are sculpted onto the plastic, such as the case with the Azrael Batman. And so here with this comparison of either of these two figures from this most recent wave, hopefully I did enough to kind of show off some of those stark differences, not only for the obvious as far as the color swaps, but also some of the things that may have gone a little bit under the radar as far as things of inclusion that could gone a bit of ways to at least justify a double dipping for certain collectors. If these are brand new iterations for you as a collector and you never originally owned the prior existing versions, whether it be the original Batwing or the Night Send version of the Azrael Batman, then that's not going to be that bad of a pickup, especially you managed to find Troika Batman sandwiched in the middle, consisting of the entirety of that triple threat wave. But if you already own the existing before, it really boils down to the color preferences. Does that black and cherry red for the Azrael Batman really pop to you? Or are you one of these collectors such as myself that prefers their Batman to be completely cloaked and covered in a very aesthetically pleasing black costume, such as the Batwing over here? And hopefully this comparison helped in making some decisions as far as pickups or passes, and also shine a bit of a spotlight of what kind of position McFarlane is in right now regarding this potential last year of the DC license, because not gonna lie, I'm a little scared that we are kind of resting on certain laurels, and those laurels are coming in the form of repaints, reissues, some of which are very much warranted and appreciated, such as that Grim Knight that came with the Killer Croc, because it's been a minute since we've seen that Grim Knight. It's been a minute since we saw that Merciless Build-A-Figure, now completely assembled with a much better color variation. But then we get to iterations such as this with much more recent figures, and we're taking away instead of adding more, but kind of increasing the price. I'm sorry, but eventually that's not going to fly with certain people, and the buck is eventually going to have to stop, both figuratively and literally. What do you guys think? Let me know down in the comment section below, and while you guys are down there, hit the thumbs up button if you guys enjoyed this video, thumbs down if you did not, and as always, stay humble, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.